The South African Communist Party says they have discovered a plot by some people from KwaZulu-Natal to assassinate their leader, Blade Nzimande. We have in studio First Deputy General Secretary Mapaila to shed more light on these allegations. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, can you confirm the threats against the Secretary General Blade Nzimande? And also bearing in mind that I think sometime last year we spoke to you and you spoke of death threats against yourself. So what exactly is going on? Who is targeting the South African Communist Party leadership?
Well, firstly, we want to condemn these intentions. It has come to our knowledge of a plot that seeks to eliminate Comrade Blade Nzimande, but also to start a smear campaign, which is coordinated by some rogue elements, largely, I think, with connections in the intelligence services who are based in eThekwini in KwaZulu-Natal. And we think that's where they are beginning to launch this massive project. Obviously, I think it's largely in response to two things. Firstly, the role that the Communist Party played in addressing the whole problem of corruption and state capture in our society, particularly in government. And also, secondly, the functions that have been assigned to Comrade Blade, where he has also been dealing decisively with the rod that he found in the Department of Transport. But we want to extremely express our serious condemnation of these intentions, and we want government to take action to make sure he is properly protected, as well as his family being properly protected, and the leadership of the Communist Party not to give in to corrupt elements. We have understood that these corrupt elements and capturers of the state will not go without a fight. Some of them, the Guptas, for instance, are running away from the state, but those that are still inside the country, they will not go without a fight, and this is what perhaps their first punch against the leadership of the Communist Party.
Now, do you know who exactly is making the threats? And have the police been brought in with regards to reporting the issues that you've come across?
We're discussing that. Comrade Blade has just been sent abroad on a mission of the Communist Party as well. So we'll finalize that particular process as to how do we take it up, but we'll also alert the police as well as the leadership in government as well.
Now, in terms of, you touch on the fact that, you mentioned the fact that the issues of smear campaign and using the intelligence agency, how were you able to determine that the fact that some people within the intelligence agency could be involved?
Well, what they've done, just to give a highlight, is that they've set up an operation center to coordinate this, basically to start looking at every action it takes, the movement, and so forth. And some of the people who were involved, I think, got scared, and they decided to withdraw, but by actually alerting us and with some of the information that they were exchanging. And it is that we think the police will take it to them so that they are able to deal with it. But we can't wait any longer, because he's not here now, and his family will remain vulnerable. So it's important to raise this point so that they can remain safe, and also to condemn generally this kind of agendas. And so that the movement headed by the ANC should also take this kind of issues seriously. So the attack and dealing with parasitic networks in the state is an urgent task in order that ministers of state cannot be intimidated by rogue elements in the intelligence in order for them not to deal with corruption in the state.
Now, has there been any reaction from the governing party, the African National Congress? Have you been able to engage with them with regards to these threats against the Minister Blade Nzimande?
We have informed the team that works with his security, but as I indicated, he had left this morning. So we'll work out a process to inform them properly. But at the moment, we want this thing to be stopped, and for the people who are planning this to know that we now know. And what is also unfortunate is that it includes very so-called respectable people in society, including men of cloth, and we want to alert them that this is completely unacceptable, and we will never stop defending the Communist Party, and we will also expose their real intentions so that even their congregations can actually disown their actions.
Now, Mr. Mapaila, Since you're here, let's talk about other issues in terms of what the SACP stance. There's been an unfortunate accident with regard, and 7 people have lost their lives at the Sibanye gold mine after a seismic event that took place on Thursday, and their bodies were retrieved the last bodies were retrieved in the early hours of this morning. Last night, Minerals Minister Mantashe made a statement of the fact that mining companies must be held accountable and must take full responsibility for any accidents that take place in the mines where mine workers are hurt or in the event of deaths. What's your take as the SACP on this?
First, we send our condolences to the families of the miners and the unions that they belong to and their core workers, but also to condemn the attitude of Sibanye mine, because that mine has had an ending accident. You remember just a year ago, over 200 workers were trapped in their mines because when the electricity went off, there was no generator to come in, and endangering lives of so many mine workers. And later on, other mine workers died in their factory. And I think that government should act very strong, not necessarily call for action from these companies. As much as we do that, government has the authority to even terminate their mine, their license to mine, so that they can continue to put the lives of mine workers in danger. If they are unable to do so, the government must give that license to a different mining company that can actually protect the workers. The life of workers is extremely important, but we'll be joining COSATU in a protest action at the Sibanye mine in the coming few days.
In terms of, you speak of licensing, the issuing of licensing, which is a long process when it comes to the mines. And Sibanye Gold, as you mentioned, there's been a lot of issues there. What do you think the first step should be in terms of reaction from the mining house itself and from the Minerals Ministry, and then taking it forward to other mining companies that also go through or that haven't gone through such experiences, but with a potential going forward?
Well, firstly, they need to invest in training of workers, but also to make sure that they've got appropriate equipment so that can make sure that workers are safe. And particularly in this incident, we understand that if there was a quick reaction, or the team that was underneath when the first seismic incident happened, if they've taken appropriate action, which is a consequence of poor training, they would have actually saved workers. But the ball is in the court of the mine bosses, particularly Noel, the Noel Friedman, the CEO, who has been arrogant actually with regard to transformation in the mining sector, and particularly in dealing with the safety of mine workers.
Why has nothing been done about it? Sibanye Gold, as you mentioned, as we all know, they've gone through such events before. Why has there been no action taken against the mining company?
I think it's largely the attitude of government. We appreciate that there's new minister in that area who's coming to reassert the authority of the state, also the protection of workers. Is a mine worker himself. He understands that particular environment, and that we want to appreciate. But we think that generally, big capital has a negative attitude toward authority. They think they are the authority themselves, and that's why they ill-treat workers in this way. The trade unions must come on board as well. But we know once they are at the workplace, it is the companies that actually have the resources. They deploy those resources. Sometimes they don't deploy them proper, particularly with regard to the safety of workers. All they are caring about is just to make profits and not care about the well-being of workers. And we think that time should be over. As we are entering a new dawn in this country, a new dawn should be a dawn of the interest of workers and the poor and their well-being.
Interests of workers and the poor, what options are you putting on the table with regards to these are the steps that need to be taken by mining companies, and how do the trade unions come into play, as well as government with regards to making decisions and making policies to ensure that mine workers are protected, as well as the business itself?
There are sufficient policies at the moment that can protect mine workers. The problem is the companies. They do not want to follow those policies. And the government as well has not imposed punitive measures that are necessary to ensure that they comply. And I think that's one of the major problems. But when we present the memorandum next week, possibly in our joint action that we have agreed at the Alliance Secretariat, because we have been really saddened by this event, we have asked our comrades in COSATU and the NUM to pull together an action so that we can go and demonstrate in front of Sibanye mines, as well as ensuring that government can come on board. Also, there's a section that deals with inspectorate, which sometimes is not working from the Department of Labor. We want them to continue to monitor the well-being and safety of mines so that this kind of incident can't happen. One life lost is too much, and that should not be ever repeated again in another incident. But Sibanye has been a repeat offender in this regard, and we are really saddened by their attitude, particularly of their management.
Mr. Mapaila, very quickly, about 2 weeks ago, we saw SAFTU, which is Zwelinzima Vavi's union, taking to the streets and against the proposed minimum wage. Your take as COSATU, which is totally different from what SAFTU is basically putting out there in the streets.
Our comrades in Cape Town and perhaps in other parts have joined the marches, but we are not opposed to the national minimum wage. We think it's a good start because majority of workers, almost 9% of South African workers earn below 2,200 rands, and over 6 million workers, or just about 6 million workers, earn below 2,500 rands. So if you increase that by 1,000 rands, that's too much for them, and we can't delay that. And we're also saying we are supporting the living wage. In fact, it's a campaign that we have raised that all federations across the country must come together to fight for a proper living wage for all South African workers. But it should not just be the question of the workers. The political parties, particularly the ANC that is leading government through the alliance, should also come on board to ensure that South African workers can earn a living wage. At the same time, we don't say because there's no living wage, we can't have a floor base of a national minimum wage. So we are not necessarily in contradiction. We are simply saying the introduction of the minimum wage is at least the basic step towards us coming together to fight for a living wage. And of course, many other campaigns that affect workers across federations, whether it's about outsourcing of work, the restructuring of the workplace by big capital or capital as a whole, as well as this problem of labor brokers. All those affect the workers across the board, and we can come together and fight against the capital. We don't have to fight other workers, because workers can never be the enemy of other workers. The capitalist bosses are the real enemies of the workers. These are the ones that are killing workers, that are paying them slave wages, and all of us coming together, we should not do so in contradiction of one another, but we should complement one another so that the workers' interests can be fulfilled.
Now, Mr. Mapaila, as you mentioned, a starting base. What sort of timeframes are you looking to work towards in terms of an increase from that starting point?
Well, those are the issues that we have said that part of the delay should debate those issues in Parliament, so that employers mustn't just think that because they've given a worker a national minimum wage, they have no obligation to increase that particular minimum wage. Actually, all South African workers should not earn below that amount. And so the discussion in Parliament, we have asked that they be speeded up, because this should have been implemented on the 1st of May. And in the non-implementation from the 1st of May, big capital actually saves from not implementing that. And also, if you say, let's wait until we have the full living wage, big capital continue to save at the expense of workers. And that's why we think that all nitty-gritties should not take too long. It should be important that at least before the coming, even from a government point of view, the coming legislative framework that is in Parliament ends, this question of the national minimum wage should be legislated.
Now, on another note, the bus strike action that has been taking place in the past couple of weeks, workers are suffering, people have bought bus tickets and now having to revert to taxis and trains. The bus strike, the unions are asking for, they've dropped their what's the word? Yes, their demands from 9.5%. Now they're saying 9% in the first year, and then the second year, 9.5%. But the employer is basically saying, we're not budging. We are sticking to 8%, and that's it. Do you think that, and the unions are now saying that the employer are negotiating in bad faith? What's your take on this? And do you think there's likely going to be some sort of resolution? Because at the end of the day, the people of South Africa are the people who are suffering.
Yes, we are really concerned about the ongoing strike, but we support the strike, and our comrades have joined the picket lines across the country. And what's also important in this one is that in the Western Cape, particularly in Cape Town, both Satau and NUMSA came together into the picket lines against the bosses that are oppressing them, which is a very good thing to do, because it shows workers that the employers don't discriminate on their union affiliation. But we want in South Africa a proper public transport system that is safe and reliable for the working class as a whole. And we think that in the absence of that, the bosses who are in the bus industry are taking an advantage, because the government is not leading in this sphere of a very critical service to the people. We have launched a campaign some years ago as the SACP. We have resolved again to resuscitate this particular campaign on public transport that's safe and reliable. It can go to the township even during the night and everything else, which is what is happening in other parts of the world. We see no reason why it should not be so in South Africa. We condemn the intransigence of the employers who always want the workers to give in, and they never want to give in something. And those workers work terrible hours, long hours, even away from home, but they are poorly paid by these employers. And we think that government must also step in and encourage the employers to respond to the demands of the workers, which are very meager demands. I mean, when you look at what they are earning and the 9% that they are talking about, it's a small increment. And those employers actually is not even what they give their children for lunch, what they are paying these workers for the whole month. It's an insult general. But we think that overall, we need a different regime of negotiation in the private sector, so that the government can't simply say, this is not our terrain, we leave it to the private sector, particularly on a matter that affects the general public. I was at a discussion with the students here at UJ. Majority of them were complaining that students are no longer even having buses to transport them to their residences. And these are working class students. So the whole country is suffering from this continued strike. It must be resolved, but the bosses must come to the party and pay workers what is due to them.
Mr. Mapaila, do you think the strike action or the actions that are taken by the people of South Africa, for instance, using the bus employees as an example, do you think this action is working in terms of strike action in South Africa as a whole? Looking at countries like Japan, for instance, I think the bus drivers are also on strike. And what they're doing, their striking is different in the sense that they're letting people get onto the buses, but are not taking any payment from them. Do you think South Africa is ready for a strategy like that?
Well, in this case, it's different because the buses are largely private owned. So they have locked the gates, drivers can't have access to the buses, but those ones are different. I think we'll reach that particular stage, but it's an important point that workers have resolved to go to the ultimate tactic that they can use for the bosses to listen to them. When the bosses don't listen, the only thing that workers have is to withdraw their labor, which, by the way, it's more important than the money that the bosses make. That is why wealth of society is created by labor. That's the primary creator of wealth. And the bosses, in this case, they have nowhere to go. They have to respond to the workers. All we can do as South Africa is to support the workers on strike, the bus drivers in this case, and other workers when they are on strike, to give them solidarity, so that they know that we appreciate the reason for their fight, so that the bosses, and on the one hand, can be able to listen to them and go to the negotiating table in good faith and negotiate with workers. They will still make huge profits, and they continue to make huge profits. If you take, for instance, the mining companies, as well as the transport companies, and look at what they make per year as opposed to what they pay workers, you realize that we're allowing the so-called free market economy to wreak havoc in the working class in this country, and that must come to an end. But it will come to an end if workers unite themselves, so that when they resolve to take strong action, the bosses will understand the impact they will have on their pockets.
As we speak of that, bus workers' unions have stated the fact that they're going to be intensifying action in terms of their striking action that's taking place currently. You know, in terms of intensifying, what do you think they should be doing to ensure, as you say, labour is a huge a factor in this? What more can be done?
Well, firstly, the intensification of the strike has many sides. Amongst those is to make sure that there's no scab labor, which normally the bosses revert to try and get other workers who are not permanent to come and take the work of those who are on strike, is to avoid that. But to make sure that in doing so, the communities must join the strike. So there should be a secondary mobilization of communities to join the strike, so that there's a broad strike that affects not just one industry, but others related industries, and including in public services. When we have that kind of solidarity support, then the bosses, even government, can come in much more stronger to push the employers to make sure that they can meet the demands of the workers. But otherwise, workers must continue to improve their tactics in the strike. But obviously, normally, we don't want long strikes. We want short strikes, so that they continue to have popular support of the masses. But at the same time, if they are long and the masses have not been mobilized, then it can create a discord. The people can start being angry against the workers, which they should not, because they should understand the plight of the workers and their families. And by withdrawing their labor, they're actually making sacrifice for the common good, even of ordinary people who are not necessarily in the transport sector in this case. So we will continue to support them until they've won their demands. And we think that the bosses have no choice but ultimately to give in to the demands of the workers.
Mr. Mapaila, thank you so much for joining us. We'll leave it there for now.
Thank you.
And that was First Deputy General Secretary of the South African Communist Party, Mapaila, joining us live in studio.